Welcome to Stanford's Memorial Church and to this performance of Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham Jail. It is an enormous pleasure, as you can imagine, to welcome Anna Deavere Smith to Stanford as our visiting artist, and of course to welcome violinist Robert McDuffie and pianist Anne Epperson to Memorial Church for this performance. Dr. King was arrested and put into Birmingham Jail on Good Friday, 1963. While he was in the jail, someone gave him a copy of the local newspaper, and there he read the public statement from 8 Alabama clergymen. He knew he had to respond to it, but he was in jail. He had no writing pad, so he began writing around the edges of that newspaper and then on any little scraps of paper he could find. And finally his lawyer, Dr. Clarence Jones, smuggled in some sheets of writing paper under his shirt, down his pants, when he came to visit Dr. King. We are delighted and honored that Dr. Jones, the man who smuggled in those sheets of paper, is with us in our audience tonight. Welcome, Dr. Jones.
My room was on the first floor. It was the room it had been for the student government, and all of the other young women in the dormitory were on the floors above me. So even as they were ordered to desegregate, they were still doing everything in their power to keep me segregated, which came to be significant because the word had gone out for everybody to turn out their lights. And I still have my lights on. So I was, in a sense, an easy target. And I was just kind of going about my business in the room, not expecting anything. And all of a sudden, I heard this crash. And my suitcase, which I had still not unpacked, was open on the floor. And now, I was a Southern black 19-year-old, and when you go away to school in the South, you like to look nice, and I had nice clothes, and I packed them, and I had already been to Wayne in Detroit for a year and a half, so I was into looking bohemian, not tacky bohemian, but looking really good bohemian. So I had my boots and my long socks and all of that, and I looked, and there was glass all over my clothes. So I knew then that I was in a riot. And I said, well, this is how it is. And I had friends who were in the civil rights movement who were daily being exposed to all kinds of overt brutalities. But you see, these weren't people desegregating schools. These were, SNCC people, people on the front lines, people in the trenches, although there had been Little Rock. But I had not yet been exposed to that kind of outright violence. And so before I could get to know what to do next, the house mother came down and no, it was the dean. And he said that we were going to have to go. Well, I was just beside myself because I hadn't done anything to anybody, and it just looked like the whole thing was about to be lost on account of something that was beyond my control and something I didn't even know what it was. And so I got my things together, and I came down, and the house mother, who was really one of the good souls actually, but she had somehow allowed, or maybe this was something that's beyond her control, all of the young women in the dormitory to come down and to line up in that long lobby. And tear gas had been used to disperse the crowds, and they had been instructed to strip the sheets from their beds to get the tear gas out. Now, I did not know that at the time. So to come down and to face, all of a sudden, just this sea of white female faces, pretty much in the dark. Some of them standing on chairs, some of them down on the floor, pretty much in the dark, although there was some light. And I walked by the first one, and it was just silence. And I walked on, and one of them threw out a quarter and said, "Here, Charlene, go and change my sheets." Now, I did not know what the origin of that was because I did not know that they had been instructed to strip the sheets from their beds to get the tear gas out. And that was the only human sound or reaction that I heard. Nobody snickered or giggled or anything. And I walked out into the night, and I remember I was clutching a Madonna that I wore to express the religiosity in my soul that I felt. And as I walked out into the night, it was a haze, partly because of the tear gas, and partly because I was probably starting to cry. April 16th, 1963. My dear fellow clergymen, just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus to carry the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my hometown. Moreover, I am cognizant of the fact of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine if injustice exists, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. You may well ask, why direct action? Why marches, sit-ins, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and to foster such a tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait almost always means never. We must come to see with one of our most distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it's easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait, but when you have seen your mothers and fathers lynched by vicious mobs at will, when you've seen your sisters and brothers drowned at will, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering, when you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she's told that Fun Town is closed to colored children, and see the ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality with an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for your 5-year-old son who's asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and you find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you're humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs saying white and colored. When your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John. and your wife and mother are never given the respected title of Mrs., when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living every day at tiptoe stance, never knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. Over the past few years, I have become gravely disappointed in the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you about the goals that you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of nonviolent direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purposes of establishing justice, and that when they fail in that purpose, they become dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the tension that is already alive. We bring it into the open so that it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Segregation must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion. Never before have I written so long a letter. I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been sitting at a comfortable desk. But what else can one do when one is confined in a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I have said anything in this letter that overstates the truth and indicates an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything that understates the truth and indicates my having a patience that allows me to settle for anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. I hope this letter finds you strong in faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each one of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of prejudice and racism will soon pass away, and that the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and that in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr. On this trip to Montgomery, we stopped at First Baptist Church. It's the same church that was pastored by Reverend Ralph Abernathy. It's the same church that was pastored by Reverend Ralph Abernathy. It's the same church where I met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Abernathy in the spring of 1958. Young police officer, the chief came to the church on behalf of the mayor that was not available. And he gave a very moving speech to the audience. The church was full. Black, white, Latino, members of Congress, Asian Americans, family members, staffers, children, and grandchildren. And he said, what happened in Montgomery 52 years ago was not right. When you arrived during the Freedom Ride, said the police department didn't show up. They allowed the angry mob to come and beat you. And he said, Congressman, I'm sorry for what happened. I want to apologize. He said, this is not the Montgomery that we want Montgomery to be. This is not the police department that I want to be the chief on. Before any officers are hired, he said, they go through training. They have to study the life of Rosa Parks. They have to study the life of Rosa Parks. They have to visit the historic sites of the movement. They have to know what happened in Birmingham and what happened in Montgomery and what happened in Selma. He said, I want you to forgive us. He said, to show the respect that I have for you and for the movement, I want to take off my badge and give it to you. The church was so quiet, no one said a word. And I stood up to accept the badge and I started crying. And everybody in the church started crying. It was not a dry eye in the church. I said, officer, chief, I cannot accept your badge. I am not worthy to accept your badge. Don't you need it? He said, Congressman, I can get another one. I want you to have my badge. And I took it. And I'm never, ever going to forget it. And I'm going to hold on to it forever. But he hugged me, and I hugged him. I cried some more. You had Democrats and Republicans in the church crying. Young deputy, assistant, young black police officer was sitting down. He couldn't even stand. He cried so much like a baby, really. It was the first time that any police chief in any city that I visited or where I was arrested in the 60s ever apologize or where I was beaten. It was a moment of grace. It was a moment of reconciliation.